Do you find yourself minimizing the things that you've been through? Do you catch yourself saying things like, I should have left sooner. I should have known better. I could have handled that differently. If I didn't allow it, it wouldn't have happened. Or maybe you hear yourself saying, it wasn't that bad. Other people have been through worse. And I'm probably just overthinking this, right? And you don't even realize you're doing this. You're just notice that every time you start thinking about what happened, you end up turning it back on yourself. You replaying situations in your head. You focus on what you did wrong. You question your reactions and you question why you stayed. You question why you still affected, right? And somehow the focus stopped being on what happened to you and it start being about what you should have done differently. And that is guilt. And a lot of times we don't even realize it as guilt. We think we're being honest with ourselves. We think that we're talking and taking accountability and being realistic. But what we're really doing is minimizing our pain and blaming ourselves for surviving. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this episode. Why guilt shows up and why it does in this healing process and how it keeps you stuck and how it makes you fight yourself instead of healing. But before we get into that episode, I want to introduce myself to the people that is new here. Hi, I am Rose, and I'm your host here at a Sister Love Podcast, and I'm just one woman with one voice trying to help women heal, one story at a time. And if you're a woman who is in the beginning stages of the healing journey and don't know where to start and is searching for the resources, support, and education, then you are in the right place. I would love for you to be part of our sisterhood. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications so that you never miss another episode of a Sister Love Podcast. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Sister Let's Heal Together, where we keep the conversation going, share our stories, and support each other along the way. So in the last couple episodes, we've been talking about roadblocks and how they show up when we try to create safety in our healing process. Because once you get past awareness and willingness, a lot of us get stuck. We realize we're willing to do the things that we have to do, and we realize that we're aware of the things that we have to do, right? But something else needs to change. But for some reason, we cannot move forward, and we're learning how to break cycles. But we know that to break cycles, we have to create safety. And when you create a safety, there will be roadblocks that we run into. So in episode 3, we talked about the first roadblock, which was the nervous system, what it looks like when the nervous system is dysregulated, how that keeps us in survival mode, and a few things that we can do to start regulating. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about the second roadblock, and that is guilt. We're going to talk about how guilt shows up in the healing process, why it becomes such a roadblock, and how guilt can literally keep you stuck even when you want to move forward. And I'm also going to talk about some ways you can start working with guilt, some tools and some things that you can do to ease it so that it doesn't control your healing process. Because the whole point is for you to stop feeling stuck and start creating safety. Right? But first, I want to talk about my own experience when it comes to guilt and how it showed in my life, because it showed up in a way that I didn't recognize it at first. When I was in my abusive relationship, I didn't want to tell my truth. And it wasn't because I thought people wouldn't believe what I had to say. It was because I felt guilty. I felt guilty about what would happen if I told my truth. I didn't want the person who hurt me to be treated differently. I didn't want people to look at him differently. I didn't want people to turn on him. I didn't want him to get backlash from what he did, right? So in my head, telling the truth felt like I was doing something wrong. It felt like I was hurting him. And I know it sounds crazy when you say it out loud, but that's how guilt works. Because in my mind, he loved me, right? And I told myself, if he loves me, I should love him back. And loving him meant loyalty. So I feel like I owed him that, right? I feel like I shouldn't do anything that could harm him, even if that was hurting me and harming me. So I stayed quiet for a long time. I kept everything to myself. Then guilt showed up in another way later on in my healing process. When I start learning more about healing and trauma, I start wanting to share what I was learning with the people around me. I was finally able to tell my truth without feeling guilty, right? Because I knew the things that I'd been through and I thought it might help other people. But when I realized they weren't doing the work, and when I saw they were still stuck, and when I noticed I was growing and they weren't, I felt guilty about that, right? Guilt that I was progressing and they weren't. Guilt that I was changing and they were staying in the same place. Guilt that my growth made things uncomfortable. So I start shrinking myself, right? Minimizing things. I downplay how much I was learning. I downplay what I had been through. I made it seem like it wasn't a big deal, right? And a big part of that came from comparison, right? I used to tell myself all the time, other people had been through worse than me, right? So I minimized my pain. I'll say, yeah, he did that, but I could have left. I allowed it. So it's really my fault. I would take a responsibility for things that weren't my fault. And I know victims are not responsible for what someone else did, but guilt will still convince you that you are. And then there was guilt towards myself, right? This one was consistent. I think about how long it has been, and I tell myself, why am I still affected by this? I replay moments in my head and think, I could have left. I should have known, right? I allowed this. I blame myself for staying. I blame myself for reacting the way I did. I blame myself for still thinking about it. And instead of giving myself compassion, I punished myself. I made myself feel like I was failing at healing. Like if I'm still hurting, it meant something was wrong with me, and that guilt kept me stuck. Because how do you heal when you're constantly judging yourself for needing to heal, right? And that's the thing about guilt. It doesn't just show up in one place, right? It shows up towards yourself. It shows up towards other people. It shows up because of time, and it shows up because you're comparing your healing to other people outside of you. And the whole time, it's making you question whether your pain even matters. Like maybe it wasn't that bad. Like you should have stayed. You should have stayed. You should have left, you know? And right there, that's why guilt is one of my major roadblocks, because as long as you're questioning your pain, you're not actually dealing with it. You're just fighting yourself. So I shared how guilt showed up for me. Now I want to talk about how guilt actually works in the process of it. So guilt usually starts as a thought, right? A thought in your head. For me, it sounds like I shouldn't have let that happen. I could have handled that better. I should be further along than I am. At first, it just feels like a thought, something that pops up in your head and you brush past it. But guilt doesn't stay there, right? After a while, those thoughts stop feeling like a thought and start feeling like facts. Because once the idea is in your head, you start building cases around it. You replace situations. You look at where you are now. You compare yourself to other people, and you start stacking little moments that seems to confirm what you're thinking. And before you know it, you're saying, yeah, that's probably true. And that's when guilt moves out of your head and into your body. Now, you're not just thinking it, you're feeling it. You feel uncomfortable sitting with yourself. You feel tension when you talk. You second guess what you say. You start holding parts of yourself back, right? You explain less. You apologize more. You try to smooth things over. You feel this constant pressure to fix something. Then your behavior starts to change. It makes you want to make things right. It makes you want to correct, explain, or repair something that you may take responsible for that's not fully your fault. Guilt want resolve, and it want closure. It want things to feel balanced again. Now that we know what guilt is and the process of guilt, let's talk about the kind of guilt that usually show up for trauma survivors and what we should actually do with it, right? And that guilt is called emotional guilt. Emotional guilt is when you feel bad because you believe that you did something wrong handled something wrong, or should have did something differently, even when realistically you were just surviving. This kind of guilt comes from how you judge yourself. You look back at situations and you start measuring your actions against what you think should have had happened. You replay moments, you question your choices, and you second guess your reaction. And after a while, those thoughts doesn't stay in your head. It turns into feelings. You feel tense, uneasy, restless, like something needs to be fixed, like you owe an apology, an explanation, or something need to be repaired. That is emotional guilt. And here is a important distinction that I need you to understand. Guilt is about you did something wrong, and shame is about identity. It's about something is wrong with me. What emotional guilt can turn to shame really fast if you don't handle it. So emotional guilt doesn't just show up in one way. There are a few common types trauma survivors deal with. And one type is the guilt tied into a specific moment, right? This is the kind that sounds like, I shouldn't have stayed. I should have said something. I should have left sooner. I should have fought harder. I should have known better. That guilt get attached to one decision or one moment. You replay it over and over, thinking if you had done something different, everything would have changed, right? Another type is anticipation guilt, right? This is the guilt that shows up before you even do anything. You feel guilty for setting boundaries before you even set them. You feel guilty for speaking up before you even speak. You feel guilty just thinking about choosing yourself. So instead of moving forward, you freeze and you stay quiet and you hold back. And then there's exit guilt or survival guilt. This one isn't tied to a moment. It's just there, right? You feel guilty for surviving, guilty for doing better, guilty for healing, guilty for being okay when others aren't, guilty for outgrowing people, guilty for wanting more for yourself. Nothing specifically happened, but you still feel responsible. Now, that's what we understand different type of guilt show up for someone who experienced trauma. Let's talk about what to do with the guilt when it shows up. All right. When guilt shows up, the first thing is figuring out what kind of guilt it is, right? So the question becomes very simple. Did I actually do something wrong, or do I just feel bad? If you actually did something wrong, you hurt someone, crossed the line, lied, or caused harm, then guilt has a purpose, right? So you owe it to apologize. You need to correct whatever you did for every reason and try to move forward. And that's it. But if you didn't actually do something wrong and guilt is still showing up, that's a different situation, right? That's guilt usually come from your past and how you were treated and how you were raised and how other people reacted to you, or you blame yourself for things that weren't in your control. So the next question becomes, what is guilt actually trying to protect me from? A lot of people don't realize this, but guilt can be a coping mechanism. It's usually developed when you're in survival mode. It's something that your mind uses to get through situations that don't feel safe. It helps you to feel a little more manageable, even when it's not, right? So when guilt shows up, the real question isn't, why do I feel guilty? It's what survival instinct is kicking in right now so that I can feel safe. What guilt is trying to protect me from, what is trying to keep me from feeling, remembering, or facing. Is it protecting me from a memory? Is it protecting me from conflict? Is it protecting me from harm? For me, guilt showed up as loyalty, right? I feel guilt about telling my truth about my abuser because I didn't want him to get hurt. I didn't want him to face consequences. Yes, on the surface, that looked like me protect him. But the truth is I was also protecting myself, right? Because in that situation, the happier he was, the safer I felt. Keeping him calm meant I wasn't in danger. So guilt was just about betraying myself. It was a way that I stay safe, right? When guilt is used as a coping mechanism, it's doing its job. It's trying to protect you from something your body and mind wasn't ready to handle. So when you ask what guilt is protected from, we're not going to judge what comes up. The goal is trying to understand it. And once you understand what it's protecting from, you can decide if you want that protection still or need that protection, or you can sit with it and stay stuck. It's all a choice, right? Okay, a great way to work through this is a exercise that I use all the time called rational acceptance. And I want to explain why this works, especially when it comes to emotional guilt. Emotional guilt keeps you stuck because you're constantly fighting reality. You're replaying what happened and you're stuck in the shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? You're judging yourself for how you survived a situation instead of looking at what actually happened in that situation. So you're always in friction. You're either stuck in the past or stuck in the future. And I said this before, the past equals depression and the future equals anxiety. So what we're trying to do is stay in this present moment. But guilt makes that hard because guilt is a survival coping mechanism and it developed to help us through things that we cannot handle right now, right? So when that happens, it pulls us back into survival mode. So to move out of survival mode and back into the present moment, this is where rational acceptance come in, right? Rational acceptance helps you practice accepting what happened without conditions, not excusing it, not judging it or yourself, just accepting that it happened. And when you stop fighting reality, guilt starts to lose its grip on it, right? So let's get into the exercise. Now, step one, hold on, get pens and paper, right? I need you to name the guilt that comes up for you. For me, one of the biggest things that I had to deal with the guilt around abandoning myself. I feel like I abandoned myself in my abusive relationship. I allowed things that I knew weren't acceptable. I stayed longer than I knew I should have had. So the guilt for me was about abandoning myself. Now you do the same. Name what you feel guilty about, right? Now, step two, name what actually happened, not what you wish happened. For me, here's what actually happened for me, right? I didn't love myself. Because I didn't love myself, I was looking for someone else to fill that void. Because of that, I allowed things that I shouldn't have had, right? I stayed longer than I needed to, right? My sense of worth and love was wrapped around my abuser. Now, I need you to actually talk about what happened, right? And not what you think or should have happened, right? I need you to be focused and really focus on that. Now, step three, I want you to separate what was in your control and what wasn't. For me, what was in my control was how I saw myself, right? I knew I was struggling. I knew I was seeking validation. But what I wasn't in control was how he acted and what he did and how he treated me. Now I need you to do the same. I want you to be honest with yourself, right? And don't take responsibility for things that's not yours. Now, step four, name what you're still dealing with, right? And struggling with. For me, I was struggling with loving myself, right? Now I need you to do the same thing, right? Now, step five, practice accepting rational acceptance, right? And that doesn't mean you forgiving this person. It doesn't mean you agree with what happened. It just means you're accepting that it happened so you can move forward. For me, I had to combine all of it together and I made this statement. So I would love for you to do the same thing. And here's my statement. I accept that because I didn't love myself. I allow my abuser to treat me in a way that hurts me. And because of that, I'm still struggling with knowing my worth. I don't like that this happened to me, but I accept that this happened to me. Now you do the same. Say what you accept without justifying it and without judging yourself. And now step six, notice what changed when it comes up. When I talk about this before, I noticed my jaw used to tight, my stomach used to get in knot. But now when I accept it, instead of fighting it, I can respond differently in a more relaxed way. And I feel more in control of the narrative, if that makes sense. Now, how I move forward and how I see myself. Now it's your turn to do this exercise. You can do this exercise as many times as you need. You can turn it into an affirmation. I really want this to help you, right? So if you were like, oh my God, I'm driving and I really couldn't write it down and I didn't have any pen and paper, you know I got you, right? You know everything is in our Facebook group, right? Sister, let's heal together. It's in our resource center. I'm just saying. So if you didn't hear everything I have to say, you're like, oh my God, Rose, you talk too much. Rose, you talk too fast. I ain't gonna lie, I do sometimes. And I just be flowing because, like I said before, I'm a little new to this, right? But I'm true to this. And when I get nervous, I talk fast. So yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, everything that whole exercise is in our resource center in our Facebook group. So feel free to go download it and do the exercise. All right, before we go, I want to leave you with some advice that you can actually use when dealing with guilt, right? When guilt comes up, here is the thing I want you to remember. Guilt comes from standards we create in our mind about what we should or shouldn't be doing. Those standards usually come from how we were treated, how we were conditioned, and what we had to do to survive, right? So when guilt shows up, don't immediately try to fix it or push it away. Instead, ask yourself, what feeling is coming up right now? What thoughts just popped up into my head, and what rules or conditions was placed on me that made me believe I had to act a certain way? I just want you to try to being curious this week about the thought and feelings that comes up around guilt. That's it. You don't have to do anything with it if you don't want to. Just notice and be aware of them. Now, let's talk about what's next. Episode 5, we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about what you're afraid healing will take from you. The fear that healing will change your life. The fear that you won't be able to keep living the way that you've been living. The fear of losing the roles and versions of yourself that you learn how to survive with. But I'll save all that for next episodes. But before I go, I really want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being present. Thank you for spending your time with me, because time is valuable and it's something that we'll never get back. I truly appreciate that. And before I sign off, let me ask you something. Are you in our Facebook group? If not, we would really love for you to be part of our sisterhood, Sister Let's Heal Together, where we finish the conversations that we start here on this podcast. Okay? So I hope to see you in the group. But if not, until next time, signing out, your sister to love, Rose. Bye.